on October 7th, my childhood friend Yarden, who's in the picture, was kidnapped from Kibbutz Be'eri and held hostage for 54 days. This is the light note. Sorry. When I found out that this is what happened, I couldn't breathe. A lot of fear, anger, sorrow for that she was there. And luckily, I'm a mother of 2 young kids, 5 and 2, so I had to, in some way, put aside my feelings and give them the attention. Their world really shattered on October 7th. I mean, we came back from a family trip to Thailand into alarms, a new word called safe room for them, no schools, and a friend that is missing. My older son, Tom, he asked to go for what he calls kids' coffee. So I took him, and unfortunately I parked the car right next to these posters. And he said, "Mom, who are all these people? Do we know someone?" And I told him, "Yeah, you do." And you can see he's pointing on Yarden's picture. Then came the more difficult questions. He said, "Why are these pictures up?" And I told him, "These people are missing and we're all looking for them together." And he said, "How did they get lost? And can I get lost too?" And this is where I had a choice. Do I infuse my son with anger, fear, hatred? And I chose not to. I left him with his naivety, and I told him that I'm here to protect him and that we will find these people and bring them home. Yarden's family and friends, throughout these 54 days, we marched, we went to demonstrations. Her family was on all media all over the world. They met every politician that you can dream of. And with this persistence, they managed to bring her home to her husband and daughter. And I was talking about choices earlier. October 7 put in front of me and many others a huge choice. Do we take this time now to change our ways? I've been working with Aziz. Do I decide to blame my Palestinian friends? Do I decide to hate? And the answer for me was no. I know that Aziz, like me, was living through and still living through a similar or very different nightmare.
It's been a nightmare for a long time. I was born in Jerusalem, and my brother was killed when I was 10 years old. He was 19 when that happened. And I didn't feel I had a choice. This is me next to my brother, and I felt you don't have a choice. When somebody kills your brother, the right thing or the thing you feel is to go after them and to revenge. And it took me 8 years until I came to a different conclusion, that there is a different path. It was when I went to study Hebrew in an ulpan, where Jewish immigrants, newcomers go to study Hebrew, and I met Israelis for the first time who were not at checkpoint and with guns. And it was only then that we started that conversation. This nightmare continues today. On October 7th, I work with a lot of Israelis. I've been a peace activist for 25 years, and I have friends who are Israelis who were hurt and killed. Vivian Silver, somebody I worked with who was killed then. But I also have friends in Gaza. I have family in the West Bank. I have family in Jerusalem. And it was also miserable for them. In Gaza, for example, my friend Abdul Rahim, one of the coolest guy you'd meet, you can tell from the hat. And Abdul Rahim family pretty much was wiped out. 50 people in his family were killed. In this photo, you see the children who were killed in his family. And in the upper middle photo, these kids, after they were killed, their father was actually working in Israel at the time, tried to go back to bury them, failed, and still until today, he hasn't been able to go back and see his kids. But Abdurrahim, like Kim, like myself, refused to let any of that stuff, any of the pain, any of the hurt, any of this nightmare to make us get astray from our path, because we know hate will never be the way to solve any of this. We live next to each other, but we are extremely divided, sometimes by physical ways, checkpoints, walls, fences, sometimes by societal pressure. It's sometimes or often easier for us to meet abroad than to actually meet at home. And maybe, Kim, you remember how first time we met.
It was like a joke, a Palestinian and an Israeli going to a bar.
It was an Ethiopian restaurant.
Ethiopian restaurant. And we found out that we support the same English football team. And I have to say, Aziz, I think that in a parallel lifetime, if we were both in Israel and Palestine, we probably wouldn't have met. And I remember the first time you took me to Ramallah. I mean, for me, it hit hard, the understanding or the realization that I didn't even in my life Google what Ramallah looks like. And it's an hour away from my house. And when Aziz took me, my family was so worried. They were waiting the whole day to hear from me that I'm back safely. Spoiler, I'm here. And that trip really broke down many walls for me. Walls of fear, and the same for my family as well. We learned that a different way is indeed possible. We actually became good friends. About a month after Aziz and I started working together, he already traveled with my dad. Football games. I went to Ramadan dinner with his family, and my son, Tom, the older one from the previous story, is in love with Aziz.
What not to love, right?
This last March, Aziz came to visit, and Tom hasn't seen him for a long time, and I told him that he's coming. I think it's one of the most emotional minutes in the last few months, because he heard Aziz is coming, and he said, "Mom, we need to go to the supermarket and get snacks for Aziz, and we need to prepare for Aziz." And when Aziz came through the door, he jumped into your arms. And, sorry, for me it's this naivety that I wish for all of us to stay in. And the understanding that my son can have these feelings towards a Palestinian friend is something I wish he takes with him throughout his life.
This transformation happens to so many of our colleagues, our friends. Every peacemaker goes through this journey, especially when you live in a place where it's hard to meet. And I remember when I was in my Hebrew class, I was walking once to my Hebrew class and I heard a siren. And suddenly every car stopped. People got out of their cars and literally stood still. And so I freaked out because no one's moving, no one's talking, there's a siren, people standing still. I would and talk to them, no one would answer me. And obviously it was a clear, like Brittany said earlier, must be aliens coming to Earth, they're controlling all of us, and sci-fi book is basically becoming real. And I started running, and I got to my Hebrew class, and I saw my Hebrew teacher, the siren had just stopped, and she was the only other person moving like me. And I'm like, this is kind of cool. It's like a sci-fi movie, except in this one, it'll be a Palestinian and an Israeli who will save the world, at least not only me alone. And I asked her what's going on. She said, this is the Holocaust Memorial. It happens every year. You don't know about it. And I said, no, I lived in Jerusalem, 20 minutes walk away. I had no idea what she was talking about. And then I started thinking about how broken our communication must be, how little or how much we assume about each other, Because all these people who saw me running because I was terrified thought, oh, look how disrespectful he must be. Look how much he doesn't care about what's happening. And then for me, I was like, I just don't understand what is happening here, why these people are running. So for us, it's been a journey. For 7 years, we've been working together, doing a lot of things all over the world, building dual narrative trips in probably over 20 some countries. During COVID, we hosted a live stream so people can travel through our online conversations. And then the last few months, we've been doing tons of conversations, whether it's with universities or congregations or organizations or businesses, about how to talk about these issues, how to have tough conversations. What is it that we can do together? And in these hard times, it's even more important that we are able to work together.
And it's not always easy. Our communities, our families, our friends continuously try to ask us questions that are led by mistrust and fear. They tell me, Kim, do you think your Palestinian colleagues condemn October 7th? Because we saw people celebrating in the streets when the hostages were brought in. Do they actually think that we can make peace with a terror organization called Hamas? You're probably getting similar questions.
I get very similar questions. Do your Israeli friends stand against the occupation? Do they see what's happening in Gaza, the genocide? How do they react to that? And these questions can be upsetting when you hear it, but they are very important. And you can fight with people and argue with them, or you can listen to them and understand that there is a real pain. There is anger. You cannot tell people, don't be angry, don't be sad, don't be upset. We are angry as well. Kim and I are angry. Every time you read the news, anger is normal. The question is, do you let your anger control you? Do you let it spread hate? Or do you do the opposite? Anger is like a nuclear power. It either can destroy or it can create light. And what we do is that we try to use our pain, our anger, to do something good, to try to stop the destruction, the war, the hate that is around us.
And I'm really proud of us that we're persistent in continuing in trying this relationship out. When I brought these questions to you, it actually made me feel more comfortable, knowing that I have a place to listen. And our friendship didn't end because there is a war. I didn't stop liking you, appreciating you. And I think that not walking on eggshells is one of the most important lessons that we learned throughout this whole time. I talked a bit about caring, and I think caring for someone doesn't change during a war, but sometimes your expectations do. And honestly, on October 7th, I was expecting more of my Palestinian colleagues to reach out. And I'm going back to the choices that I talked about earlier. Here are some of them. Making a choice at that moment of picking up the phone and calling them and showing them that I still care and showing them that my anger or my sorrow or my fear is not towards them. And that changed the relationship in a way that when Yarden came home, they were the first to call me. They were the first to send a message saying that they're so happy to see that she's home. And I think that creates a safe space that you can't find in any other person.
We learned a lot of lessons. One, for example, is indifference is not an option. I went to many Israeli and Palestinian schools and talked to students before October. And one thing I always got was, but we want peace and they don't want peace. And therefore, we will do nothing. Indifference is one thing I kept encountering. When I talked on television, talked with politicians, talked with people who have the ability to make a change in the last 20-some years, indifference seemed to be the name of the game, where people say, if we can't keep the status quo as is, it'll be good. Former President Obama just recently said, I could have done more. And there is a blood on all of our hands, those who could have done more. So we don't believe that we can just watch and do nothing. We have to be active. We have to raise our voices. You know, one of probably the biggest mistakes in the last 20 years, or maybe more, in the peace movement, not just in Israel and Palestine, I would say everywhere, is how peacemakers are always marginalized, always told, we don't need you on the negotiation table. Women are also always marginalized. There was a study that just came out 3 months ago that said if women are part of a peace agreement, it raises the chance of that peace agreement to succeed by 35%. And yet in 2022, there were 18 agreements, and guess how many of them had women involved in the table? One. So we say our voices will not be marginalized. And so in the last few months, just a smaller group of us have been literally on every television and radio and newspaper you can imagine, because we said we will not allow people to talk about us. We need to be the ones who raise our voices. We've met with leaders, politicians, ambassadors. We were recently invited to meet with Pope Francis in front of 13,000 people, where he also met us and let our voices be heard on live television in Italy. Covered by literally every place you can imagine, and told people after he listened, I don't have an answer. What I want to tell people is reflect on what you can do to support this movement. And so let us all think together, what is it that we can do?
Just like our fellow explorers talked before us, we heard Lee and Sarah and Paul showing us how they're pushing the boundaries of the human ability. And what Aziz and I are doing is pushing the boundaries or crossing the boundaries to create more compassion. And we've learned that even social media is very selective. And what we're encouraging people to do is ask the difficult questions. If you see something that you don't feel comfortable with, go to someone that knows or is seeing something different than you to hear the other side. Otherwise, you're just stuck. Honestly, I had a conversation once, or a talk, that I said the person I want to talk to most is one of my Palestinian colleagues when I hear bad news in Israel. And my husband said, what? I'm here. And I said, but you're going to tell me the exact same thing that I am thinking. I want to hear another narrative. That's the only thing that can help us move forward.
And it's not because we are naive that thinking, oh, we're so hopeful, everything will be fine, it's all good. I think we know sometimes it doesn't feel hopeful, but we feel it's an obligation. It's an obligation for us to try our best. There's a Palestinian poet named Samih al-Qasim, and he wrote one of the poems that has impacted me the most. In it, he says, when the person who kills me, when my killer rifles through my pocket, he will find traveling tickets. One to peace, one to the fields and rain, and one to the humankind conscious. He said, I beg my killer, do not waste these tickets. Do not ignore them. Please take them, use them, go and travel. And as somebody who lost his brother, I hope people don't have to wait until more and more people have to die, so we say that thing. Let us travel to where we can achieve peace. Let us go on that journey together, because none of us can do it alone. None of us can bring that kind of energy alone. That's the whole thing about exploration. We learn. We go beyond our presuppositions, our pre-assumptions. And what we say to people who say hate is the only way is that we will do everything we do to surprise reality until we make a change. And we want to tell you that we hope you can also join us in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you.